Australia's Labour Prime Minister, John Curtin.
I'm happy to be back in Australia. I've seen many things and many places. And although every man can be forgiven for loving his own country best, I believe it is an impartial assessment of the facts to say that I have not seen any country or any people better than my own.
Welcome to Curtin's Cast, the John Curtin Research Centre's podcast, brought to you by myself, Nick Doranforth, and Redbridge's Cos Samaras. Each fortnight, we bring you the freshest and most challenging conversations with leaders, activists, and thinkers from the world of Australian and global politics, culture, and ideas. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Good morning. Welcome to this post-election election review edition of Curtin's Cast, our JCR's podcast of politics, culture, and idea. You're joined by me, Nick Doranforth, head honcho, El Supremo of the JCRC, and my good mate, JCRC board member and director of Redbridge Group, Cos Samaras. G'day, Cos. Welcome to Curtin's Cast.
Hello.
How are you holding up after the election frenzy, mate? Great performance on ABC when they actually let you and Tony Barry get a word in.
We had our say.
Just be careful, mate, because I don't want you saying anything else and being written up in the gossip columns of Nine Media and News Corp.
Well, gossip media are akin to basically it's an art form, isn't it? It's basically they become experts at reading graffiti in toilets.
Just on that, I'm going to give a little swipe to someone just because it's my podcast and I can do whatever I like. Right. To whoever screenshotted Tony Barry's messages, because you're obviously a friend on Facebook of Tony Barry, you are an idiot. You are a goose, and you're obviously not a mate of Tony's, and I hope you're happy with yourself. Tony will just go from strength to strength, as Redbridge will, and we're here. We're here. Obviously, we're going to deep dive into the election with Cos, Tony's brother-in-arms in the pollster business. Cos, this is Labor's best result since 1943, when the great man John Curtin was around and led Labor to its greatest ever election victory. Anthony Albanese has entered electoral folklore. He is the first Prime Minister since John Howard in 1998 to win back-to-back elections to be re-elected. He is the first Labor Prime Minister since Bob Hawke back in 1984, 41 years ago, to be re-elected. You know, Julia Gillard got Labor across the line into a minority government in 2010, but obviously we started out with Kevin Rudd in 2007, and Elbow joins the great man, John Curtin, and the other great man, he certainly thought he was a great man, Gough Whitlam, as one of the only three Labor Prime Ministers to take the party from opposition to the Treasury benches into government and then win re-election. So no one can ever take that away from Elbow, Team Elbow. Cos, what happened? It confounded people, but it actually it actually tallied with the final poll, national poll, which Redbridge carried out.
Yeah, it was all there. So if you look at the key seats track that we were publishing every week, the one thing that stuck out to me was those numbers coming out of Queensland. We were polling Leichhardt and Ford and those sort of electorates. And they were recording the swing to Labor, and I thought it was just a data aberration. And clearly it wasn't. It was clearly picking up very strong trends there towards Labor, and we saw how that manifest on election night. I mean, basically, look, all the demographic problems we've been talking about have all come home to roost for the coalition, coupled with, a political party who seem to be stuck in some other decade, in some other era, talking to a generation of voters that are no longer alive.
Yeah, these are Howard's children, mate, and Howard's children finding themselves politically homeless.
That's right. I mean, they are now pushed out of every...
Not a single seat, Cos, in metropolitan Melbourne, but may well be the gold stand in Kooyong, and I want to ask you about the Teals, but...
Yeah, so it's Latrobe, right? So I'd still consider Latrobe as a urban electorate. They've been pushed out of Adelaide, pushed out of Perth. As I touched on before, one seat in Melbourne. Basically non-existent in Sydney, with only, there's a few seats they've got there that are urban, and Brizzy. And it's pretty grim. They have lost the support of another cohort, which we picked up, which is older Australians who rent and have a mortgage in their 40s and 50s, were the ones that actually dumped them during the campaign.
People like me.
So 9% of their primary vote collapsed from the time we started that wave for News Limited to the end. And
now, obviously, that's the first time you've done this, Cos, but are we talking about an unprecedented campaign time shift?
Yes.
And that's been picked up in the other polls. I know YouGov have been up and about yesterday and today saying that they picked this result. And that's been picked up in the other polls?
Yes, us. I think there was probably one or two others out there as well.
I think the only polling outfit which seemed to get it really wrong was Freshwater. Am I right?
Who were the Liberal Party pollster?
Not a great time for those on the centre right. Well, we can actually get into the definitional game, whether they're actually we do in this mega review get into the why, what happened, but yes, not a good night for centre right politics, and they've abandoned the centre. But we'll get into those weeds in a tick.
The problem with the way polling was conducted, I think, on the Conservative side, is that obviously it had some methodological issues. I'm not privy in terms of what happened and what those numbers were reported and so on. But what really accentuated the blowback on them and their research program is really the backgrounding they were doing during the campaign against every other polling outfit. They were pretty keen to basically say that every other pollster was wrong and that their polling was right, and that they were basically performing all sorts of numerical gymnastics to convince journalists that you had this significant One Nation vote out there that was going to come home for them with regards to preferences. They could roll out a few the other mates to basically indicate that they were going to secure 90% of those preferences from One Nation. None of that materialised. In fact, it was quite the opposite. The vast majority of the 6 million Australians who voted for something other than the major parties preferenced the Labor Party, and we saw the consequences of that writ large.
Yes, no, I want to dig into the non-major party vote as we tick along. So we're looking at a 2PP national vote of about 55-45. Do you think, or will it
54?
About 54-46. But that's a thumping victory. And where do you think the final seat tallies will line up? Will Labor get to 90 or?
I think I'll fall short of that.
It's a tremendous victory, though. I mean, really and truly. I don't think any of this. I had by the start of the campaign, I thought they were going to form a slim majority government by the start of the campaign. I don't know whether I actually said that on the pod, but I certainly said that privately. But I didn't think, and I don't think even the hardheads in Labor CHQ and the dedicated state secretaries and campaign managers around the country thought that Labor would get into the sort of mid to high 80s.
It really boils down to...
Which is part of the expectations management as well, isn't it?
Well, kind of, but it also boils down to that real serious difficulty in reading that other vote.
Yeah.
So you can get a read on the Labor primary, and you can get a read on the coalition primary. Sometimes you get it right, sometimes you won't. But it's really about how you then start reading that other vote. And that's a far more significant task now because it's so big and so impactful. What we do know about it is it does skew much younger. It doesn't comprise of many older Australians, I can assure you of that. And so, I had Labor at about 72 to 78 seats. I thought they could get to 78, and we've seen a complete blowout. It wasn't just a slim majority; it's a convincing majority now.
Yeah, you and I have been banging the drum about the importance of millennials, Gen Y, and Gen Z, and combining them together, and they outnumbered Boomers this election, and nationally they were crucial, weren't they? Because
absolutely right. I mean, they weren't just crucial, particularly women. So if you look at our key seats track, Labor had a 10% two-party preferred lead over the coalition with women in key seats. Now, these key seats that we were tracking at are suburban regional. So we're not talking about professional women. Dutton had a far greater problem with women than Morrison. Morrison had a problem with professional women. Dutton had a problem with all women across the board. And I would say it isn't necessarily just Peter Dutton. I think it's
the brand Liberal.
Brand Liberal, correct. And the women that we're talking about are actually in their 30s and 20s. Some of them have got kids, some of them don't. Most of them live in the outer suburbs and regions, and they delivered some pretty serious death blows to the coalition.
The biggest death blow was struck, I want to go through the various states, I want to go through the parties, mate. The most major blow struck against the Libs was in Victoria and metropolitan Melbourne. You were talking about, mate, on a bad day, they would lose 6 seats.
At the beginning
of the beginning of the campaign. On a good day, they'd lose 3 seats. And how is it looking overall?
And in the last week, we were saying on a bad day, they lose 3. Right? So they're probably going to lose 1, which is Bendigo. So they've done pretty well. And there's been swings significantly across the board. And again, the outer suburbs have delivered for Labor. It all boils down to, again, the type of diverse constituencies that live in Melbourne and Sydney in particular.
Yeah.
And they are, overwhelmingly choosing Labor over the coalition as a brand, as a political brand. In our polling, it was about 60% two-party preferred for Australians who speak another language other than English at home. Again, we saw that writ larger in the result.
What happened in Bendigo? That was a bit of a surprise. Or was it not a surprise?
Bendigo's...
explain Bendigo to listeners, because we sometimes we assume as politicos that everyone knows what we're talking about.
Bendigo is a federal electorate that is obviously situated around the city of Bendigo, historically a very stable political environment for Labor, but it occasionally does become volatile, especially when the National Party stands. And the last time they did that was at the 2010 Victorian state election in Bendigo West, where they basically did the same thing to the Labor primaries as they've done in this case, and that is collapse it. And that's what's happened here, and I don't think Labor's going to get home at this rate in that seat. So they're going to lose 1 seat there.
So this is Jacinta Allen territory as well. So Morris for Jacinta, and Labor and Victorian Labor and regional. Yeah,
I think
regional
it's
Victoria.
I think it's unfair to suggest that this is because of her. Yeah, okay, she's got to worry about this part of the world now because it's clearly politically volatile. But as the Labor brands perform really well across Melbourne, right? And elections, Victorian state elections are definitely won and lost in Melbourne now. And
New South Wales. We're going to come to New South Wales.
No, Victorian state elections, I said.
State elections, my apologies.
Yes. So, and so, if you were to then basically look at this federal election result in Victoria and suggest that perhaps the brand's got a problem, it doesn't really have a problem when they are given a choice between the coalition and Labor.
I don't mean to suggest that people should be reading that into it, but one of the things I was the Libs ran really hard on, pairing elbow with Jacinta Allen and a lot of their negative advertising. And as you pointed out beautifully on Twitter, they had ads running about Jacinta Allen and elbow, in
Double Trouble.
Brisbane, Double Trouble. What was going on there?
Well, it's clearly they not only have problems with their
polling. They would have set them back, 100K?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably a billboard of that size will cost about that much. Yeah. It's putting aside the poor placement. I think the lack of research that must have been, and qualitative research, not quantitative research, that would have that should have been applied with regards to that material they were rolling out in Victoria is quite clearly evident. It clearly didn't work, and it drove votes to Labor. So maybe their campaign reminded Victorians that having a Labor government and a federal Labor government was a good thing.
Yeah, I know Jacinta Allen was out there talking about how this was a vote for the suburban rail lib. I think Labor people need to be a little bit careful there and reading too much into what happened on Saturday as well. Just before we leave Victoria, it's also the place where there seems to have been that if we're going to see any shift back to the Libs from the Teals, this is Melbourne is where it's happened, because there's been no movement in over in Perth and no movement in Sydney. But in Victoria, it looks like Goldstein and possibly Kooyong will head back to the Libs.
Well, I think Goldstein will be won by Tim Wilson.
Yeah. And Kooyong, are you prepared to make
Kooyong, I don't know yet. We'll have to wait and see, but definitely Goldstein.
Do you want to explain to listeners why have those two seats shifted back into the blue column?
Historically, they've got a stronger and deeper base, coalition base, conservative base, because, in those electorates, they are a little bit more difficult for Teal independents to hold on to than, I would say, seats in Sydney.
Less renters in Goldstein, for example.
Absolutely, yes, correct. And we can't, discount the impact of the Jewish community feeling quite bruised with regards to what's happened over the last couple of years.
Correct. But from what I can see, look, Josh Burns has easily retained the seat of McNamara, and having a look at the booths in the so-called bagel belt, the falafel belt, where I reside, and my booth had a 40%. This is super orthodox part of Jewish Melbourne. 40%. Josh romped at home on primaries. He was in the 40s. This is where I thought, he would drop back to sort of 20, 25%, but it didn't happen.
That's right. And I think they voted for Josh Burns to ensure the Greens did not win.
That was the big message. Yeah,
that was the big message. The Greens brand. We thought there would be a bit of a recovery, and I thought that maybe the federal election was going to animate their base in a positive way. In fact, what we did see was a continuation of that electoral deterioration they've been experiencing as a political movement now for the last 18 months.
Yep. Park those thoughts, Cos, because I'm going to get the baseball bat out and whack them over the head, whack-a-mole, because it's a fun thing to do on a Monday morning after the election. The other state, which we didn't think were necessarily going to be crucial to the result, state where Labor has performed poorly at a federal level, is Queensland. And there were quite a few surprises. Oh, actually, back to Victoria, mate. No. I'm not going to let you off the hook here. Back to Metropolitan Melbourne. Now, Deakin, you swore that Deakin wouldn't turn red, and you'd made a bet about some expensive cycling gear. You're giving that up? Have you given it up yet?
Deakin's definitely won by Labor. Yeah. But again, that's a manifestation of what happened over the last couple of weeks of the campaign.
I'm only teasing it, Cos. How much was the cycling gear that you've given up?
I don't know. I can't remember, dude.
Queensland. Dutton's home state. Peter Dutton lost his seat, and big surprises. We didn't think that one of the seats that we were talking about was Leichhardt, far north Queensland. We didn't think that would shift into the red column, but it has. What happened in Queensland?
It's what happened across the entire country. Basically, anything that was urban swung to Labor. And we saw that writ large in Queensland as well, with some exceptions like Leichhardt.
Yeah, because it's interesting because in 2016, there was a big swing against a lot of anger against the Campbell-Newman government, but the LNP haven't really been around. They haven't been in government too long. So, yeah, it does seem to bear out the explanation that Queensland not that different to the rest of the country, and the same kind of swings in the urban and metropolitan cities. So this has happened across the nation. The Liberals.
Nation, and I like to make the point that it appears that the two political parties that have embarked on culture wars in this country have paid severely as a consequence of it.
The two political parties.
Two political parties, Greens and the Liberal Party.
Correct. They've really both abandoned the centre, didn't they?
Well, they in their own way have embarked on a whole bunch of, I would say, issues that cause angst and anxiety within the community. And perhaps the lesson out of this election is that if you're going to go to the electorate that has just endured a pandemic, an inflationary crisis, perhaps you should just approach it with, and not just approach the campaign, but also approach your activity in Parliament with a bit more care and empathy, rather than thinking that you've got to basically traumatise parts of the community at the expense of others so you can gain some cheap votes.
Yes, so this is where the Greens lost 2 out of 3 of their MPs that they won in 2022. All those great gains for the Greens, I think, essentially wiped out, which is not to say that the Greens are in necessarily an existential crisis, but they did need to do some hard thinking about whether they want to be a party of protest, a party of, the culture wars in that left-wing radical sense, rather than the sense that we understand it, or too often understand it, the right-wing MAGA-style Trump culture wars. They've got to decide whether they want to be that or they wanted to appeal to mainstream progressive voters. And as you pointed out on a couple of occasions on this podcast, don't confuse your activist membership with mainstream progressive voters. So, the Greens need to have a good light. I'm not sure whether they're actually capable of that deep self-reflection and self-criticism. If you look at the statements from Adam Bandt's seats at threat, I'll be interested to see whether you think he'll lose his seat to Labor in Melbourne. But Adam Bandt, Max Chandler Mather, who also lost his seat in Griffith, there were boasts about how well the Greens performed. They'd won more votes than they ever had before. They'd kept, apparently, according to Adam Bandt, they'd kept Peter Dutton out. And then they blamed the Liberal vote collapsing for their seat losses. They blamed Advance, the right-wing agitprop, well-funded agitprop group for the anti-Greens campaign. They blamed, the stray cats sort of wandering around to Wills, but they don't look like I'll knock off Peter Khalil there. They blamed everyone else except having a good hard look at themselves.
Well, I mean, when you're a political party, whether you're the Greens or the Coalition, and you start blaming certain parts of the community for your result, then you've got a problem. I think it's time for those who had a bad run on the weekend to have a look at why they're struggling and how they can remedy their problems. But they're running out of time, because the community that we're dealing with and seeing express itself at the ballot box is very volatile, gets views, it establishes views about political parties pretty quickly. And so I think they've got a bit of work ahead of them.
Yeah, but we're going to see the detailed polling results from, the Australian Electoral Survey, obviously from groups like Redbridge. But they still poll very strongly amongst young people. So, the Greens are not going anywhere.
No, they're not. That's right.
They've hit a ceiling. They've hit a ceiling. And unless they bring their A game to each and every campaign, they're going to tread water. They're at one election, they'll go up by two or three MPs in the lower house, then they'll drop back down. But they did perform quite well in the Senate, which is a good reminder to Liberal and Labor that these guys are not going anywhere. They represent a social class. They represent, the core of their base is the knowledge class, middle class professionals, and particularly strong vote amongst young people. That's not going anywhere. So,
that's right.
But they need to get real. They need to get real, mate. This blaming the media and vested interests. Welcome to the world of the Australian Labor Party. We've dealt with this for 134 years, the party of the working class, the party of the poor, the party of disenfranchised. We've dealt with what you might like to call the ruling class vested interests who don't like the Labor Party, who campaign against Labor Party at every single election. Virtually none of the newspapers, and I know it doesn't really mean anything with who they editorialise for, they all campaigned against Labor Party. Welcome to our world, guys.
Yeah, look, I think they just have to get used to the world that they're operating in and actually learn a few lessons out of this. They, as you touched on, they still have levels of support that are significant in parts of Australia, but particularly with Gen Z. So I think I wouldn't write them off. They're going to have a fairly big, significant presence in the Senate, but as a party that was potentially going to grow more in the House of Representatives, I think they've learned a few lessons here that they've got a long road ahead.
Yep. Big wake-up call and a mega dose of humility. How did the other minor parties go, Cozzy? One Nation, Trumpet of Patriots?
Flopped. It's probably the best way we can describe it. It doesn't surprise me, really. We touched on the type of voter that abandoned the Liberal Party over the last 4 to 5 weeks. They are in their 40s and 50s who rent and have a mortgage. And these Australians overwhelmingly chose minor parties and independents, but clearly did not park their support on right-wing minor parties. There was a bit of that going on, but there wasn't enough for it to mean anything in the whole scheme of things.
In the big scheme of things, something that we've been talking about relentlessly, Cos, and our survey work together has probed this. At this stage, you don't have all the data to dissect the working class vote in the outer suburbs, the working class vote amongst men, particularly young men. Are you able to? I wanted to hear you talk about this on ABC, but we didn't get around to hearing this in the 6-hour coverage, mate, on Saturday night.
We needed 8 hours.
Any trends picking up? Did we see these voters stick with Labor? Was there a bit of bleeding to independents and right-wing parties, but then that came back as preferences?
So let's go and have a look at Melbourne. So in Melbourne, where Labor did better than expected in Melbourne's West, it's a direct result of the Indian diaspora.
Yep.
Where Labor did better in inner parts of Melbourne, like Deakin and Menzies, that's the Chinese diaspora. Chisholm, Chinese diaspora. So newly emerging communities in this country, and there are many of them, and we could see that writ large in Sydney as well, in Bennelong and Reeve, for example. These communities are becoming quite strong for Labor. And when you speak to these Australians, they'll tell you why. So we asked them, okay, so why do you become such a rusted-on Labor voter? I mean, you're quite aspirational, you've got socially conservative views, all of that. You probably voted no at the referendum. So why are you so rusted on? And their response is quite simple. And actually I'll use one response that will give you the perfect, I would say, frame of what sort of problem the Liberal Party face. The one response is they don't like us. They being the coalition. And so when you think about that, we'll remember that.
Yeah, unpack that phrase, Cos. Unpack that phrase. What do you mean? What do they mean? Sorry.
Yeah, so they arrived in this country over the last 15 years. A very significant part of that period, the coalition was in power. What could you best define the coalition's narrative was with regards to these communities and migrants in general and immigration in general? One of, I would say,
inconsistent message.
That's right, inconsistent, negative, particularly with the Chinese diaspora, but also with immigration in general. And of course, Dutton's camp comes out and runs a number of policy announcements in that immigration space. Again, just reminding them as to why they don't like the Liberal Party. And so these communities saved Labor's bacon and delivered it big time for the Albanese government. There's no question about that.
Yes, it's a variation on. Do you know who said this in 2001? A Tory MP scolded the Tory parties. This is during the Blair ascendancy, where they said, voters think we're the nasty party. The nasty party. Do you know who said that, Cos? Theresa May.
Well, there you go.
She hit the nail on the head. She hit the
I
nail
think
on
the
the
best
head.
way you can describe the coalition, I mean, if you think about what they did at the beginning of the campaign, what they needed to do was to roll out hope and empathy, care, kindness. That's what they needed to do. They came out, no, we're going to sack 40,000 Australians. We're going to send entire workforce back to the office, which, of course, most women thought that's all of us, not just Commonwealth public servants. Then they, came out and said, well, if you're a Jewish citizen and you commit a crime, we're going to send you back overseas, even though you might actually be born here. And it was actually that policy that actually bounced pretty hard in our groups. And we said, well, you're not going to commit a serious crime. What are you worried about? Most people's response, that's where they start. They can double it, right? So again, it's the politics of hurt and pain and threats. That's all they did. They basically threatened and threatened to inflict pain on a number of Australians in a hope that they're going to win votes because some other mythical voter out there was going to get their rocks off. That basically some Australians want to get sacked.
I want to dig into the campaign in a second, but I want to finish our circumnavigation of the continent, mate. But I think you're right, and it brings us back to that excellent conversation that we had with Professor Drew Weston the other week. Politics is about the gut. Politics is about emotion. The idea that what they're conveying to you about the citizenship, the dual citizenship, and the idea of threat, that's not a rational response. That's gut. No. That's emotion.
Correct.
So
Correct.
the other place where New South Wales key as well. I don't think were there any coalition gains?
No. I think
the Libs, the Greens also didn't. They targeted Richmond in New South Wales, just south of Sydney.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at, basically Sydney behaved like Melbourne did and the rest of the country. It's basically went in one direction. We were sitting there on election night looking at the booths coming in the first, say, I would say hour, and it was very clear there was a pattern no matter where you looked. There were swings to Labor everywhere. So that was clear. That we can talk about the regional nuances, but a result like this is so significant that you really can't, like in Perth, any last remnants of the coalition presence is gone.
South Australia as well. They don't hold a single seat in Metropolitan Adelaide. Is that correct?
That's right.
That's
so
stunning.
In Adelaide. So did you say which city?
Adelaide.
Yeah, Adelaide. That's right. Correct. They lost Sturt, and of course Sturt has, as we touched on this podcast previously, a very significant number of Commonwealth public servants. And again, if you're the campaign director and your policy unit comes out with a policy and says I reckon we should put out there, guys, that we're going to sack 40,000 Commonwealth public servants. Okay, how about I'm just going to have a look at which seats might be back? Oh no, we'll confine it to Canberra. They won't believe us, mate. So no, let me go and have a check. Of course, now that was done, was there?
They hold no seats in Tasmania.
Nope, nothing in Tassie. That's a bit. It takes a bit.
It's 5 seats, yeah. Not
takes a bit of going, right? I mean, that central northern part of Tasmania has historically been an absolute nightmare for the Labor Party. Right, their primary vote has been hovered in the 20s now for the last decade, and to scare Australians so much that you even move those voters. Geez, that's an amazing achievement by the coalition.
Here's another amazing achievement, mate. I'll pick up on a really good point that Sean Ratcliffe made on last week's podcast. Let's go through recent leaders of the Liberal Party and the seats they held and whether the Liberal Party held those seats. John Howard, Bennelong.
Oh yeah,
Gonski, safe Labor seat.
Yep.
Peter Costello, Kooyong. Gonski.
Yep.
Josh Frydenberg. Obviously gone. Tony Abbott, Warringah.
Yeah, Wentworth,
Gone.
Warringah, North Sydney, all those seats are gone.
Gone. It's
yep.
only Scott Morrison's
Cook. That's
which
right.
remains. It's stunning. Had you told someone that in 2007 or 2010, any time in the last 15 years or 18 years, had you told them that that's the way the electoral map would have looked, they would have thought you were absolutely nuts. And they would have tried to get, the various authorities to lock you up.
Well, the coalition now is going to pick a leader that has a regional electorate, because they've only got, I think, around 6 urban electorates left. And so we're going to have now a coalition that has both leaders who represent the regions. And none of them obviously will have any presence in the major capital cities of this country. Yeah,
Andrew Hastie's seat. We've talked a lot about Andrew, and he held his seat. And I think if the Libs, free advice to the Libs, I think they're going to struggle to get back in next time, aren't they? The electoral cycle's against them. But looking forward, that I think Andrew Hastie is the future. But even his seat is not. It's not really a suburban seat. It's sort of peri-urban. Am I right?
That's right, peri-urban regional.
So it's a real chick in the egg situation, cause isn't it? Like, they need more seats in Victoria. They need more metropolitan suburban seats, but they can't get them without any campaign infrastructure and MPs on the ground.
Well, they need more urban electorates, obviously, and win back some of those electorates, which, look, I think inevitably sooner or later they'll win some of them back. But again, we're going to think about what happens over the next 3 years. We're going to have another 750,000 Gen Z enrolled to vote. You're going to have, unfortunately, the rest of the silent generation pass away. So that, that baby boomer and older generation that currently delivers about 55% two-party preferred vote for the coalition will be down to about 25% of the voters roll next time round. At the moment, they're 32%. The millennial and Gen Z will be well in excess of 50%, particularly in our capital cities. They've got an existential crisis on their hands.
It is. You know what? It's really lovely waking up on Sunday morning after the election, and then Monday, and then it rolls into Monday, and being on the Labor side of politics and not having to engage in the existential crises. This is the first time, since I've been an adult voter, that we've actually won 2 majority governments in a row. So it's actually nice to be on the other side of the equation and looking on at the existential angst. And it's nice to be able to talk about a really great Labor campaign. And I want to turn to the respective campaigns now. And I want to say, Albo campaigned brilliantly. He was disciplined. He was on message. He looked energetic. He was ready to go. Jim Chalmers, Treasurer Jim Chalmers, who's obviously been on the podcast, good mate of mine, and yours. I think don't downplay how important Jim Chalmers has been to this government over the last 3 years.
Absolutely.
The economic message, doing what good reformist treasurers should do, and he pushed hard on the stage 3 tax cut rejig. Labor's CHQ, Paul Erickson, Jen Light, who's the Assistant National Secretary, Paul Secretary. These guys have a lot of experience. They campaign really well. No one can take this away from Paul Erickson and Jen Light. This sort of victory, which is up there with 1943. Tim Gartrell in Albo's office. I think David Epstein, who's a mate of mine as well, he's Albo's principal private secretary. I think he's been a really good steadying influence. He's really experienced. He goes all the way back to the Hawke years. And also, we shouldn't forget, this will be missed by a lot of the media, but the state campaign teams, brilliant as well. I think Victoria as well, Steve Stakos, Jet Fogarty. When the Libs go and do their, pardon?
Don't forget about Michaela. There's a woman in that team.
Yes, no, my apologies. When the Libs go off and do their review, mate, they should actually sit there. They should actually go out and look at, be really humble, eat humble pie, multiple servings of humble pie. Go out and have a look at the way that the professional Labor campaign teams on the ground in all states operate, and seek to emulate that.
The problem the coalition have is they like to run campaigns based on myths, poor data, poor infrastructure, and they rely on effectively Labor losing elections rather than them winning them. If you look at the last, I'd say, 2019, we probably lost that election.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? We saying
governments.
Those are listening. I've got a Labor background, right? So it's not a secret to anyone. The 2016 election, you could say that we nearly won that election,
but they nearly lost it. Turnbull's terrible.
That's right. 2013, again, that's Labor losing the election. And again, we can go all the way back.
Governments lose elections.
That's right.
Oppositions do not win elections.
Well, I mean, you would argue that in 2019, it was the right policy approach, but probably a couple of years premature in terms of its timing. I think if you farmed up the Bill Shorten campaign in 2022, you would have got a different response. Because there's just more of that generation would be talking about who'd be actually willing to support those sort of policies.
Yeah, that's something your great mate, a mate of mine, Kim Carr, has been on about. He's adamant that the offering in 2019 was the right offering. We didn't get things right. We didn't get the campaign right. But coming to that big question, how much did this campaign matter? It seems like often I think that people read too much into how much movement there is during the 5 to 6 week campaign. We had the disastrous 8-week campaign that Malcolm Turnbull ran in 2016. How much did this campaign seem to matter? It mattered. It mattered.
It mattered in the way the coalition kicked off the campaign. Now we can talk about just how sharp Ericsson's operation was, and it was extremely sharp and well delivered. And I think, as we touched on these podcasts before, when you invest in your party machinery, that's what you get, right? The campaign mattered because it's the way that Peter Dutton kicked off the campaign at a time when we went from it being a referendum on the government to then a referendum between two political parties. So when people started, they popped their head above the parapet, they looked around, they were looking, saying, well, okay, hang on, who's the other mob? And they looked at it and thought, yeah, these guys scare me. And
it's a really good point, the investment in the campaign machinery. And I'll just embarrass myself here because I love a bit of self-deprecatory humour. My tools of trade, Cos, just this laptop, effectively. But this is like, if I was this is like a plumber's got his set of tools.
Yep.
There's a brickies, tradies got their set of tools. My set of tools is the laptop and my, the brain and, the sort of cerebral matter up there. And, there was one time when I need to replace this laptop. It's not that old, but and I thought to myself, oh, should I spend the money? It's like, no, these are your tools. And it's a bit, I think the same lesson applies to the campaign machinery. And it's so important because another thing which was picked up, and there's a really good piece in an inside story by Professor Frank Bongiorno, co-author of A Little History of the Labor Party with me, because he noted the candidate selection by Libs shocking. Yes. They had a stinker. And these are just mistakes which they're amateurish. They shouldn't be made in 21st century professional politics.
Clearly there was no vetting.
How does that happen, Cos? Tell listeners about your experience vetting candidates. You literally ask them everything, don't they? Whether they
we ask them
whether they inhaled marijuana or not.
Yeah, absolutely. So what drugs have you taken? When did you take them? Any pictures of you? Now, the younger the person, we know there are pictures.
Yep.
Right? Because their whole lives has been online. So, we just go right through the entire history and we'll look at their CV and we'll say, right, you say you got a degree here. Can you show me the paperwork, please? I haven't got it. Can you get evidence, please? Right? It's that intrusive.
Have you weeded people out in that process previously? Like if they haven't been able to show the paperwork, have you knocked back? I
won't comment. No,
I'm not asking to name names.
That's right. Yeah, but there have been
theoretically.
That's theoretically the people have been tripped up by the process. and have been basically told they cannot stand. And so, it's pretty brutal. Sometimes the candidate may lie to you and say, X, Y, and Z. So that's why you become more and more intrusive, because you just don't rely on them, because then sooner or later, the opposition are going to go through every one of your candidates and search their histories.
So what happened
guarantee you that the coalition did this with regards to Labor candidates. They didn't find anything. Do you know why?
They've done their job.
And their job.
So quite clearly they didn't do their job out, for instance, in Bruce, which was another one of their sort of the Libs' fantasies that they were going to take the seat of Bruce out there out of southeast Melbourne. They quite clearly had not even Googled who Zahid Safi was, who was a Liberal candidate for Bruce. Yeah. And he was just
not even the basics. Not even checking the basics.
Walking, talking, bin fire.
Not even checking the basics.
So digging down to the Liberal campaign, mate, what were the big mistakes in your mind? The campaign mattered. I think working from home was a huge mistake.
Well,
nuclear, but not for the reasons which people initially thought. Nuclear was a big mistake. And then, even opposing Labor's pretty modest tax cuts, a shocker as well. And there was a trust deficit there for the Libs. This is the party who've run around, mate, for decades now. And it's becoming increasingly noisy, talking about how the left is obsessed with culture wars, etc. These guys are obsessed with culture wars. These guys are obsessed with welcome to country, with trans issues, putting more redeeming up in lights. And they had a trust deficit on the material issues which decide elections, the economy, housing, and Medicare.
Yeah, they clearly did not do the research to identify which voters Labor had a problem with and what resonated with those voters in terms of policies. Because if they'd done the research, they would have worked out that in the majority, they were women in the outer suburbs and regions. And so bad their research must have been that policies they then subsequently announced that were perceived by this very constituency as detrimental to their lifestyle. So it should not shock anyone that, within an 8-week period, we've gone from basically a 50-50 situation with women in the outer suburbs and regions to Labor having a 10-point two-party preferred lead amongst women in the outer suburbs and regions. And so fundamentally, this is where their campaign went wrong. Their research program, it's not quantitative, it's qualitative. Whoever's doing their qual, we don't know who that is, messed it up. Or the officials don't know how to read research or don't know how to actually orchestrate it. So it was a complete mess in the back end of the campaign as well.
Yeah, they got it wrong. It's also there's an ideological and philosophical problem. Because they abandon the centre of ideas. They, those three issues that I raised before, they were suspect at Medicare. They're still paying the price for, Tony Abbott and Dutton as health minister, being seen as weak and suspect on Medicare. They're paying the price for that. But, they're all over the shop philosophically.
Yeah, I wouldn't.
On working from home, they were borrowing from the Elon Musk Doge, mega playbook. But then on nuclear, they were Dutton was proposing kind of Soviet-era state planning with the state-owned nuclear plant.
Let's just walk back a bit. So none of that Medicare stuff was negative. People say, Labor ran a Medicare campaign. Not really. Labor's Medicare health campaign worked because it was a positive offering. Labor's negative campaign was on nuclear, which was not necessarily against the technology itself, but where Dutton was going to find the money to pay for it.
Yes.
So the ad that we
cuts, you pay.
That's right. The ad that we tested that worked the best for Labor was the $600 billion price tag for the reactors. Where is he going to find the money? He's going to cut, X amount of services for it. That was the number 2 reason as to why people were motivated not to vote for the coalition. Number 1 reason, by the way, was an existential one, and that was called the Orange Man, Trump.
Yes, let's turn to Trump. He was toxic, wasn't he?
Well, he's definitely, we can say he's now the most ruthless political killing machine for conservative leaders around the world.
Yeah, he's overturned a lot. He's overturned the 2024 playbook was incumbents being thrown out because of the cost of living inflation crisis, whether they were left or right, they're all being thrown out. Biden, Sherman Social Democrats, the Tories, New Zealand Labor. I think we go on and on and on again. And even in India, Modi suffered a setback, went on and on and on. But now we've got mounting evidence that this Trump bump and the anxiety and fear and reverse patriotism, which, the behaviour of his administration is stoking in countries like Australia, but also Canada, the Canadian Liberals, led by a central banker who should be on the nose in the current political zeitgeist. They held on for an incredible victory as well.
Well, Canada's opposition leader lost his seat.
Your mate.
And Australia's opposition leader lost their seat. So, it's pretty evident as to what impact he's having.
But they should have seen that coming, cause were that, this argument, he couldn't see, the tariff cuts coming. But, Donald Trump has held those views since the 1970s. When he said he telegraphed what he was going to do.
What you don't know, or more importantly, even if you discover it through research, is the impact that such a policy will have on your local politics. And we can move to, let's say the coalition research program did pick this up. What can you do? I mean, basically, it's equivalent to Labor's position when September 11 happened. What can you do? Right. So these black swan events, as we like to call them, or external factors, sometimes just favour incumbent governments. And what you can do is try not to remind people that you are the same. So, they probably shouldn't have come out with, as we've touched on before, sacking public servants and appointing Jacinta Price as the quasi Elon Musk, and
listen to all that Sky After Dark crew, believe all this crap which is peddled by Advance and the IPA. And I've got a big thesis that, I'm suggesting that the Liberals' decline, this existential crisis, is about numbers, maybe, but it's also about ideas. There's no, even now, they're starting to talk, they're starting to talk through to the feet why it happened. And there are people talking about, we're going to go back to the Howard model, lower taxes, smaller government, blah, 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 blah. Robert Menzies, forgotten people. No, no new ideas and no ability to make relevant people like Menzies. Menzies would be appalled by the modern Liberal Party. He'd be appalled by the fact that they've presided over the collapse of the great Australian dream of home ownership over the last 3 decades. He was a small C conservative with smaller liberal instincts. He would be appalled that they would even contemplate going down the MAGA pathway. And a lot of it is ideas. You look at where they're getting their ideas from. Institute of Public Affairs. These people haven't had new ideas since 1979, the year that Margaret Thatcher was elected in the UK. Centre for Independent Studies. And when you actually also look at the people who are heading up all these think tanks, mate, and compare them to people like me, people like Emma Dawson. Hi, Emma, if you're listening. Emma's just departed per capita.
Are you having a bit of a partisan rant there, Mr.
I am. Emma Dawson, who headed up per capita, she started today at the Chifley Research Centre. We're all in our 40s, mate, and we've all got kids. Mm-hmm. I rent. Emma owns a place. We've all got young kids. We used to go to the same school together. We look more like the voters that you need to reach. I can't think of a liberal thinker and intellectual, and they're a bit thin on the ground, admittedly, who's under the age of 60. Go look at the Menzies Research Centre. You got Nick Cater, who's nearly 70s. John Roskin must be 60, must be around his 60s. None of them have had anything new to say over the last 2 decades, and it reminds me of a quote that I like to use from Lindsay Tanner, the former Labor cabinet minister. He gave a speech, the Button Lecture, in 2009. Really almost prophetic. He said, "The seeds of terminal decline are usually sown at the moments of greatest success." And I think he nailed it. Labor at that point held every state and every territory and federal government. But you can also apply that logic to the Libs. The seeds of this decline that we're seeing playing out in real time were sown during the Howard years. And they cannot get that through their head. The reliance on the boomers, the decline of a culture of ideas in the think tank world, the stale ideology, people like, Andrew Hastie haven't been given the ideological leash to prosecute a culture of ideas and new thinking. Andrew is probably, I don't want to verbal him. Hopefully we get him on the podcast at some point. I think he would describe himself as a red Tory thinker. Okay, the kind of flip side to blue Labor. I don't hear any of these new ideas.
Indeed. But let's see where the world takes us over the next, I would say, period. Obviously, we're now going to have a majority Labor government, and they obviously have to embrace significant reform. Otherwise, they too might find themselves at the end of a hammer called the 6 million Australians who vote for other than the major parties, because they determine this result.
Correct. Cause, and just to that what you thought that was a partisan rant, but I was actually coming to the point. I wanted to ask you. I could see you tuning out. I wanted to ask you another serious question. Was I think you learn the best lessons not out of defeats, but also out of the successes. If you were giving some advice to Labor and going, "Hey guys, well done, park the victory, but looking forward to 3 years, 6 years, a decade on, what should we be doing now? What should we take out of this epic victory to safeguard us against complacency and hubris, and so that we avoid the fate that the Liberals are currently grappling with?"
Okay, you've got a healthy majority. You have a buffer. You've probably got a third term under the belt if you play your cards right. Embrace reform. And come up with some generation capturing policy reforms that will lock in these generation of voters we've been talking about for a very, very long time. Now's the opportunity.
It is. I want to see workers on boards, but I'm not going to start on that particular rant today, Cosy. Thank you.
All right.
Terrific job, mate. Enjoy some downtime when you get through all the media. To our Curtinistas listeners, thank you for tuning in to this election review special. Stay with us. We're going to have some fantastic guests, politicians, activists, and some eccentric and some choices out of the box. Do tune in and do refer a mate on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple, and stay up to date with everything that we're doing. We've got some fantastic research reports on Australia's role in the reconstruction of Ukraine, on cybersecurity, some cutting-edge work on AI, which I hope the government picks up as well, how to harness AI technology in the interests of working people, that we'll be publishing over the next 6 months. But for now, it's ciao and arrivederci.